Hi, Keith again, and we're going to continue our discussion on the subject of joy. We had one previous session in which we tried to start making the distinction, and I believe it's an important distinction of the differences between joy and happiness. They are so often confused, and that leads to some problems, especially for those of us who are trying to follow commands in the Bible that tell us to be joyful always. And briefly to review, we just I tried to say that being happy always is not possible. It's just there's going to be things that happen to you almost every day that could rob you of happiness. And I'm not anti-happiness, by the way. I love being happy. I'm sure you do. James, the writer in the New Testament, said, if anyone is happy, let him sing. And so I'm all for happiness. But if you start thinking that when the Bible uses the word joy, you translate that in your mind as happiness, I think it's going to confuse you and even frustrate you, may even cause you to sort of fake it sometimes, and you don't need to do that. You shouldn't have to do that. A few years ago, when I was trying to either write or speak about this very difference between joy and happiness, I came across an illustration in my mind, and I'll share it with you quickly. You've probably been driving or riding on the interstate with someone, and sometimes you don't even notice this, but oftentimes you'll notice the signs are telling you that in addition to the interstate you're on, now a state highway or a U.S. highway is joining and is going to run along on that same interstate. And that'll happen for a while, and then there'll be signs that Highway 61 or whatever it is bearing off and going in its own direction, and you continue on the interstate. I think that's the way it is with joy and happiness. Because they are similar, we can cruise along and we can actually experience both at the same time. But then there's going to be a point where happiness will go its own way, and we need to continue on joy. Now, as we go on in the series, we're going to define and look more closely at what that joy is. Another illustration, a more biblical one, in the New Testament, or actually this is from the Old Testament, we're told to rejoice in the wife of our youth. Okay, I've been to a lot of happy weddings. In fact, I've never been to an unhappy wedding, but I have had to see and witness and help with some very unhappy marriages. And so the happiness of the wedding day that didn't last. That didn't just carry on forever. But there could be a joy, and this is why we have that command or that admonition in the Old Testament about rejoicing in the wife of your youth. Sure, in any marriage, I'm sure you'd agree with me, there's going to be unhappy moments. There's going to be moments of growth. There's going to be moments of disagreement. I think if a fella told me that he never disagreed or never had an unhappy moment with his wife, he'd lie about other things as well, don't you? And so, but joy, that kind of joy that really comes from a good marriage that's lasted for a long time, is going to last, that sort of joy, it can't be taken away by something temporary or momentary. And I think we're starting with that understanding to move in the direction that we really need to understand, is that joy, in contrast to happiness, is something that is built on something so solid, it's going to last. It can't change. It won't change. And when you start finding those things in your life, and particularly the one most important thing, which we'll be talking about most of the rest of the series, when you find that one thing, you can have joy, and the happiness can come and go. And sure, you're going to enjoy the happy times, and there's going to be sad times. As we begin to wrap up, let me share a little story with you that reminds me of this. And I think this happened at just about the time years ago when I was starting to figure out this difference between happiness and joy. Got a call from my dad, and my uncle had died after a long battle with cancer. And I remember where I was. I was in the car. I had my cell phone. I called my aunt, and I felt fortunate to catch her at home. And we sat there and we talked and we cried and everything. And so I had a thought that I'd never had before, and I just shared it. I said, well, this is a sad day. And she said, yes. And I said, you're going to be sad for a while. And she said, yeah. And I said, but let me tell you something. There's going to come a time where the sadness will begin to wane, and that's when you're going to start remembering all those good times. And she said, yeah. And I said, all the good that you had, all the pleasant times you had together, all the good you were able to do for your family, for each other, for the community, for the church, those things. I said, you know why those things are so special? And she said, why? And I said, because they can't be taken away. They are permanent. And we'll stop there today and continue on our next session. Hope you join us.